Hey everyone, welcome back to Full Stack Development with Ember.js and Rails. I am Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and as always, you can watch the stream and tell me just how wrong I'm coding it. I'm really glad you're here, catching me live or watching the recording. We are proceeding ahead with our Ember and Rails app. And we've gotten to the point where we're reading data and we're writing data. And once we're at the point where we're writing data, you start to think about authentication. You start to think about protecting the app from other people coming in and writing bad things. I don't remember if I've fully deployed, well, on my own branch of the app, I've deployed it and set it up, and I've kind of worked ahead, and I'm using the app for tracking my notes on stuff. So it turns out this approach of this idea app I'm really liking. I can track quotes from books. I can track ideas that come out of those quotes and kind of connect them together. It's really useful. But once you put an app up in a central place, not just running locally on your computer, you don't want just anyone to be able to come in and edit and delete content. So we're going to look at authentication today. Before we do, though, I have one follow-up from last week. Someone on the stream was kind enough to remind me of some uncertainty I had during the stream. There was something where I found a reload parameter that it seemed like I needed to add to a request to the server, and I wasn't sure why. So I needed to look into it offline. Now I've looked into it to kind of show why that parameter was needed, a problem you might run into with Ember data, and that you can keep an eye out for, and how you can fix it. So let's take a look. So when I'm here on the authors, let's go to authors 1, the authors page. You can see here in our web console that we're making one AJAX request. We're going to authors/1, so the author with ID 1, include sources. So we're just making one request to get the author herself and then the sources that she's written. So that's great. This is showing JSON API, the protocol we're using, including data so that we're not underfetching. We don't have to make multiple requests as we go to this screen. So that's really great. Something's different though if we start from the authors list page and then go to the detail page. So check this out. I reload the screen. We make a request to authors, which makes sense to us. But then when I click on Sandy Metz, let me clear out the bottom here, the console. When I click on Sandy Metz, there's actually two requests being made. And so this is really strange. I run across this, and even though I'd seen it before, I was confused after the stream last week when I was looking through it, trying to figure out what was going on. So let's dig into it and see why. So the symptom is, when we go to the authors 1 page, the author detail page, first a request is made for the author, including sources, as we said before, and then a request is made again for authors/1/sources. So this is not a request for the author, this is just a request for the sources relationship. And so we can see the difference here. On the author 1 endpoint, we can see in the response that the author 1 is returned, Sandy Metz, as well as some included data for the sources, the one source that's related. Whereas in the authors 1 sources endpoint, that's just the sources themselves. So the data is an array that contains one source and not the author info. So that's really strange. When we go to this page for the route that is loading this data, we see that there's just one request being made to find record author with the ID, and we want to include the sources. So why are two requests being made? So this is something that can be kind of frustrating about the fact that Ember data is doing a lot for you and hiding a lot under the covers. Can make a lot of folks say, I don't know if I want all these abstractions. I just want to make HTTP requests myself to get my content, and then I'll be good to go. But we saw last week the benefits we get from using a high-level abstraction like Ember data, just how quickly we can build new screens to create, read, updating, and delete data. So I have found, and I certainly haven't built Ember data and Ember.js apps nearly as big as some folks, but in my working for side projects, I found that the benefits of Ember data far outweigh the challenges, and I was kind of excited to look into this to figure out what was going on. So let me get my notes here to make sure I describe it correctly. So here's what's up. So when we go to the authors 1 URL, we hit the model hook on the route. So we're loading the model for that ID. Yes, and we are hitting that. We are hitting that ID. So then we go here, we go to the store, and we say find record author ID. So we find that Ember data found that we already have the model. In the case where we were on the authors list page, we already have the model for Sandy return. It's stored in the local Ember data. So I can even show that to you in here. If we go into the reload page, go into the Ember inspector, and we can see for the data we have here, that author is already downloaded. So it doesn't need to download it again. So the model hook returns, I'm not sure if it's synchronously, I guess it's still a promise, but it returns more or less right away the data that's already available for the author. In the meantime, though, Ember will go ahead, it's called it takes a, what do you call it, strategy. cache then network strategy. So if a data is available in the cache in the Ember data identity map, it'll return it right away. But it will also go to the network to see if there's any updated data. And if there's updated authored data, it'll bring it in and your screen will re-render when that's returned. So that's nice and convenient. So that's why this request gets kicked off. So in the meantime, though, as the screen is coming up and we're needing to render it, we go in here and I'll show you the page so you can see it. So we're in the author's detail page here where we display the author data, and then we loop through the sources, the author's sources. Now on the author index page, we haven't downloaded the sources relationship, just the bare authors themselves. And so Ember needs to load that relationship. So Ember data will conveniently kick off a request to the server for these sources right here. So these are the two different requests that we see. If we go back to this page, and actually let me go back here so you can kind of visualize it. We go, let me see here. Okay, this is here. Go to the page. Yeah. So the request here, authors one, including sources, that is a request that's kicked off for us by the model hook. But then when we get to the page and we're ready to render the page already, we make the request for authors one sources. This is the request that has gone out from the template because we have the model, but we don't yet have the sources. So this is why these two different requests get going. And so that's not ideal. Like, we don't want that to be the case. And you could probably solve it in a few different ways. You could preload all of the sources on the author index page as well, but I'm hoping to do a lot of reading and watching, so I'll have a lot of authors. So I don't want to preload all of the sources. Instead, what we can do is in our model hook here, we can say reload true. And what this does, if you check the Ember data documentation, reload true will ensure that we don't use the cache then network strategy. We just do network only. It might fall back on the cache if the network fails or something like that. But we say, okay, don't return any data from the find record promise until it's loaded from the server. And so as a result, if we go to our authors page, we're reloading it now that I've added that in. We can switch over to this tab. So now we're on our authors page. Now when we author list page, when we click to the author detail page, just a single request goes out to authors one, include sources, and then the page will wait for that to come back before it's all listed out here. So this is kind of just demonstrating one of the complexities of a rich stateful application like we have in front-end applications and like you'd have in native applications as well. When these are server-rendered pages, you just pull the data you need for any page and render it out. But when we have cache local data, we need to decide if we want to go with the cache or not. So that's the fix there. That gets our reload in and we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and commit that in. It seems like there's been a lot of changes on here. Let me commit these other changes as well. Okay, I added Ember Simple Auth already. We'll talk about that in a moment. We'll add that reload true, fix multiple requests on author detail page. The other thing that I was going to say was that the other thing that is kind of shown to be interesting about a stateful approach here is when you're on the author's page, when we had that bug, let me put the bug back in for just a second. When we have the bug, you get different behavior if you start from the author's list page and go to author details than if you just load author details itself. We only get one request here, but we get two requests made if we come from the author list page. So that's another complexity about these rich, stateful front-end applications. You could always say, I'm always going to reload the data from scratch on every page, but then you lose out on some of the optimizations you get from actually having a rich, stateful front-end app. And yet, there's complexities. So caching is hard, and this is what we're in the middle of now. So that was what was going on with the reload true attribute. And so now we're good to go. So now let's talk about authentication. Authentication and authorization. So these two terms, generally authentication means I want to know who you are. And then once I know who you are, authorization means I want to think about what you're allowed to access and what you're not allowed to access. So we're going to go through several steps as we do this today. First, we're going to get a login form working in our front end. Then we're going to update our backend so that we can't make requests to the API unless we're logged in. And then finally, we're going to update our backend so that there's separate data for each user, so that when I'm logged in, I have one set of data, and when you're logged in, you have another set of data. So let's go through that one at a time. We're going to be using an add-on for Ember called Ember Simple Off. having come into the front-end world through Ember and seeing the benefits of Ember Simple Auth, I was very confused that it doesn't seem like anything like this was very common in other front-end ecosystems. Like, it seems like most apps have login forms, and that's very useful to have. And so, it doesn't provide the form itself, but the handling of authentication and the storing of the key and the integrating with certain backend protocols. So I love the fact that Ember Simple Auth, the add-on, provides that for me. It works with, I think, different kinds of authenticators. Auth 2 or Devise or Tori, another library for authenticating in different ways, like against Google or Facebook. We're going to use Auth 2. And if you'll remember, let me get the link from over here. When we started our apps, I had some project templates for Ember and for Rails. And the project templates for the Rails API was called API Up. It is down in the show notes of the stream or of the recording. You can see it. And you can see that API Up, one of the things it does is it configures a gem called Doorkeeper for Auth 2 authentication. So it's already set up and ready to go on the server side. We just haven't protected anything to need authentication yet. So we'll show you how to do that. On the front end, we used an Ember template, but then when we switched over to Octane, I did not copy all that stuff over, so we're kind of doing it a bit more manually on the front end. So let's see how we can set up Ember Simple Auth on the front end to connect and to authenticate things. All right, I'm going to look through my notes on other screens that I've done. And certainly all this stuff that I'm going to be doing here, like it's some configuration. And it's not stuff that I remember because, of course, you don't tend to remember your authentication setup because you don't do it very often. So I'm going to kind of copy and paste it over and describe it as we go. I'm looking through the README. This has all come straight out of the Ember Simple Auth README. And let me see if there is a generator. I don't see one, obviously, so we'll just copy and paste it over. So that's fine. Okay, so we need a folder called Authenticators. So this allows a user to authenticate with your app. And we're going to call this OAuth, because that's the protocol we're using. And Ember Simple Auth knows to look for this file and to pull it up. Okay, so we're going to pull in a file. First thing we're going to do is pull in a file called Auth2 password grant. So this is a type of authenticator coming out of Ember Simple Auth that we're going to want to use. Next, we're going to want to pull in our env file because we've got our server name in here, and we're going to need to access that here. We've seen you have to use those env files in a previous recording. Next, we have the path on the server, and OAuth token is the conventional path that endpoint is set up by Doorkeeper. So that's the path we have. Now we want to configure the full endpoint, the full path to get there. So let's delete these pluses. So if there is an API host configured in the environment, we take that host and we put in the server token path. But if it's not, we just use the relative path, assuming that that's living on the same server that authentication also lives on. So that's going to work there. And then we just need to extend an existing object. So this code predates ES6 style, actually. There might be an ES6 way to instantiate it, but for now I'm just using this .extend format that they have, and that's all documented in the Ember Simple Auth documentation. So this says, authenticate me with OAuth and use this endpoint to connect to. So now OAuth knows where to connect us there. So next, do I have a form? Yeah, here's a form. I definitely don't want to set that up from scratch. We're going to add a login form component. Ember generate component login form. It's just nice to let that live in there. So I'm going to copy and paste that stuff over. I'm going to give this just a second for my virus scan to finish running so that we can have a file to put this in. And so let's see here. This form is just going to be a simple Ember form that has some fields in it, and then when we submit the form, it's going to go in and make some calls into Ember Simple Off. So let's go into the the login form first. And this, I'm just going to copy and paste the form all over. And we'll walk through what we have. We'll delete all the pluses here because it's from a diff. So we're using the standard Ember paper, a card, to display it. We've got a form that's going to call, that's going to go to this login action. So that's the action that's going to handle it. So we display an error message at the top. It's not styled or anything, but that's just enough for now for our kind of proof of concept phase. And there's going to be an error message that comes back from the server. We have an input for email and an input for password. And because of the way Ember Paper set up, we're using a mutation action to save the values to email and password. And then we have a submit button. So this is all just a very simple form. So the interesting stuff happens in the login form itself. So let's go up here and see what's going on. I'm going to do my imports using those snippets that I set up last time. We want an action, we want a tracked property, and then a service. We need actually all of those. So that's exciting. We've got a login form component, so we want a service, the session service. And so this is a service created by Ember Simple Auth that lets us log in and log out and check if we're logged in. Also going to hit the router service because we're going to need to do some redirecting. So now let's set some properties. We got an email equals example@example.com. Actually, yeah, I was, for the sake, in the code when I was setting this up, I kind of pre-filled these values so that I didn't need to keep retyping them as I was testing. So let's do that for now. Password equals password, which is the password of my example user I have set up. And notice we actually don't need to set these up as tracked because in this form, we're not going to be programmatically clearing those out or anything like that. So we don't need Ember to re-render based on any changes to them. Ember, the component, is just going to be writing those changes to those fields. Now we do need one track property though, and that's the error message. So by default, the error message is going to be blank, but if an error comes back from the server, we'll display it. Now we need an action that's going to be dispatched. Wow, there's a Redux terminology there. An action that's going to be dispatched when we click on the login button. So this is going to be an async method called login. So what are we going to do? First, we're going to get email and password. From the component. We're going to get those fields easily accessible. So now we're going to try, and we might get an error. So we're going to do an await to let an asynchronous operation happen. We're going to do this.session to get the Ember Simple Auth session. Then we're going to do authenticate. And so this is how we attempt to log in. We have to name the authenticator we're using. So it's authenticator::oauth. That's a common Ember string format for specifying things in the dependency injection container that can be accessed. Let me just pass in the email and the password. And then we should be good. So if this succeeds and doesn't blow up, the Ember Simple Auth session is what's going to keep track of the response. So we don't need to store anything, but we just need to say this.router.transition to. We want to transition back to the index of the app. And then if there's an error, what do we want to do? We want to set the error message. And what I found with my server setup is the exception might have an error field on it. So if that's there, we want to set it. That's the error message sent back by the server. But if that's not there, we don't really know what the error might be. So we'll just put the error object into that field and display that. So I think this should handle it. Really, this is just some normal Ember form setup to make a call to this authenticate service here. And we're not protecting anything yet. We're not locking anything down. But this component is now ready. And we're going to need a page to put it on as well. So let's do just Ember generate route login. Login is the conventional route name. Well, we'll see in a little bit that this route name is going to be needed to protect the login so that we can't go somewhere else unless we're actually logged in. So Ember Simple Auth gives us that protection pretty easily. Let's let this finish running to give us a file. That's going to be pretty easy to put it in there. All we need is the route for login. We're just going to put the login form. And we put that in a component so we can have logic with it and everything like that. So let's give this a try. We've got our app here. If we go to /login, again, nothing's being protected yet, but let's just see if the form is working. We go to /login. Our values are there. Let's put a bad value in here. And we can actually watch the Rails server here to make sure it gets hit. I guess we could look in the console here as well. We click login. It posts. We get an error, and then the error is displayed here, invalid user or password. Of course, that's not the most user-friendly thing in the world, but that's an edge case, and for the experimentation phase of our app, it's fine to leave that as is. So now let's see what happens when we have a correct username or password running against our local database here with this user. When we click login, we're redirected to the other screen. And that's great. We're set to go. Okay, so our form is working, so let's set that up. Man, always with the tests. Test, man. I like tests. All right, so let's see here. I'll say a set up login form. So now we've got our login form set up, but nothing is being protected. Our home page is showing us data right away, and we can get to whatever page we want. So first, let's set up the home page. Actually, I think this is going to let us set up every page to be able to get where we need to go. Let's see here. Add logout button. Yeah, let's add the logout button first. Let's add that next. All right, so we have the app. Do we have an app header? Mr. Joseph says, is it Ember Paper? That's correct. I'm using Ember Paper for my visual library, and it's worked pretty great for us so far. All right, so in the app header, I want to have a log out button that's going to let me know when I'm logged in or not. And using Ember Simple Auth, you can detect whether the user's logged in and change what shows up in the UI. Now we're going to need some logic for the app header now, so let's just generate a component app header. As we've seen in the past, it'll give us the option to overwrite the template we already have, because this is a template-only component right now. But we'll just decline to keep the template here and then add the functionality in. So what we get to do to detect if we're logged in, so we don't want to give the user the option to navigate to these pages unless they're logged in. So we'll just do a conditional here where we say, if this session is authenticated. I'm going to put all these buttons in there. So only if the user is authenticated are we going to show all these buttons. We don't override the template, but we get the component there. So is authenticated. Oh yeah, right. And the logout button is going to go in there as well. So we're going to say just a plain paper button because it's not navigation here. On click. Interesting. I put a string there, but typically you'd say this.log out. Log out. So if the user's logged in, they'll have this log out button. So let's put that log out functionality on our new app header component class that we have now that we need to do this. We're going to import action, and we're going to import service to get our service. And so as you might imagine, in here we're going to need service session, the session service, Ember Simple Off, and then our action to log out as we said we wanted to do from that button. And the log out action, we can just say this.session invalidate. And that's going to log us out after we click on that. So let's check this out and see if we can see the difference between being logged in and being logged out. So on the app here, we load it up. The navigation header shows up. And so Ember thinks correctly that we're logged in because we were seeing that before. Now when we click log out, the header actually goes away. So that shows that we are not logged in. And we could have a login button, but we're going to do something a little bit different later. If we go to the login route and log in, then we're shown as logged in. And when we reload the app, that login state is stored as well. Let's see where that's stored actually, because I want to give you a sense of what's going on. So we're logged in here. I know where this is in Chrome. Let's see. I think it's in local storage. Yeah, check it out. So in the local storage mechanism, that's where Ember Simple Off will store our session, and there's our access token and everything like that. So that's where it's stored, and it knows that we're logged in when we reload the page. So let's note this. Commit that says add log out button. But we're still having to manually go a bunch of different places. And so let me check in my logs here to see where I added different things. That's an adapter. App header. All right. Yeah, so there's a couple different things we can do. First, when we're logged out, no matter which screen we want to go to, we don't want the user to go there. We want the user to be taken to the login route. And so how can we do that? Well, I don't remember, but I'm going to check my notes because I don't do this very often, but Ember Simple Auth provides this for us, and you can just check in the docs and be good to go. So let's see here. You could put this protection on all the routes in your app if you wanted to. Just for my trial page here, I'm just going to put this on the main index route and go from there, because that's the main route you'd usually be hitting the app from. So from here, there's a mix-in that's provided by Ember Simple Auth called Authenticated Route Mix-In. And this mix-in says that this route requires authentication. If you're not logged in, don't navigate to this route. Go to the login screen instead. Now, interestingly, I believe there's not a way to use mix-ins with the new class-based approach to Ember. They come from an earlier age, an earlier time before ES6 classes. And there might be a way to use them, or there might be an alternative approach in Ember Simple Off. But just from the docs, I have a nice simple approach to it. Oh yeah, so we are going to need to import the service as well. So let's just go ahead and copy over the approach here. So here to use this approach, we do route.extend, and we're extending here the authenticated route mix-in. So we want to include that mix-in in our app. We want to include the session service, and so when you're doing that in older style of Ember, you have a session property on the object, and then you call service as a function. the service that's imported here, and that will inject the service that corresponds to the property it's connected to. I don't know how it knows. It's magic. It's great. We still want to use model as a model hook on here, and that can be used the same method syntax there. That's perfectly fine. So now our route works just the same, but we have this authenticated route mix-in. So let's see how it works. When we're here in the app, we're logged out. When we go to the front page, we're taken to the login screen. And so that's great. Now when we log in, though, we are taken back to the index screen, and that's fine. We're not redirected away from that. Cool. So let's check that in. Not redirected to login screen, login route when not logged in. So that's really nice. So how about when we log out, if we're on a page looking at some data and then we log out. Now we're left on the page that we were on before. So that's not ideal. So we'd like to kind of be taken back to the start. So Ember Simple Auth has a way to do this as well. There's actually a way, by default, it's set up to reload the whole app when you log out. And that's for security, so that nothing that's like transiently in your app's memory sticks around. So let's set that up. Looks like we want to set up a Ember G route application. So you can have an application route, just like you can have an application template that lives at the root of your application. And so that's what we're going to be able to set up here. We don't want to override the template, but we do want the JavaScript file. So here's our application route. And let's see if we're going to need, oh yeah, we're going to need another mix-in here. So all we need to do is the application route mix-in. And again, this is just straight out of the Ember Simple Auth docs. Let's see here. And then we're going to use the old style route extension again. We extend application route mix-in, and we don't need to add anything else. That should set us up for here. So let's give this a try. We go to the app. Oh yeah, the redirect is not there. So we go to the root of the app, the root route. We log in, and now when we go to different pages, when we log out, we're taken back to the login, and not only that, you may have seen that the browser actually reloads. So anything transiently in memory is kept out. So that's great as well. So let's add the app. All right, Mr. Joseph on the chat says, can we redirect to the last route when the user logged in? That's a very common thing. I haven't looked into that, so let's take a look here. I imagine they probably do have that built in, so let's check it out here. Walk through, so this could be authenticated. I'd need that redirect functionality on every route. And let me see, actually, it'll probably be in the documentation related to authenticated route mix-in. It's recommended to nest all of an application's routes that require the session to be authenticated under common parent route. So I could do that. Authorizer. Yeah, so I don't see specifically how to save the route that you were on. I would be very surprised if either Ember Simple Auth or somebody else didn't have that built in, but it's not something I've looked into. So check out Ember Simple Auth, or I think they have a chat. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a Gitter chat that you can talk. Oh, a Discord. They have a Discord. It's probably a channel on the Ember Discord that they could let you know. But yeah, I haven't, for my demo app here, I have not needed that, or I've not reached for that feature just yet. All right, so now all of our functionality in the front end is acting the way we'd like. We're logged in and out appropriately, and stuff is hidden from the header and things like that. But our app is not actually safe at all. Like, as I mentioned, we can still go to any route we want, like authors, and Ember will let us go there, and it'll pull down the data from the server side. So the server is not requiring us to be logged in. So let's go check out on the server how we can make these changes to protect this. This is actually very simple with Doorkeeper. And let me pull up my notes to make sure that I remember the simplicity correctly. Pulling it down. But yeah, so this is very easy. So on our server here, our Rails server, we have controllers for each of our endpoints here. And they're actually totally empty. The reason why is because these controllers don't do the heavy lifting. With JSON API resources, it's the resource classes that do a lot of the heavy lifting, setting up attributes and relationships and things like that. But there is one thing that we can put on the controllers here, and this is the nice thing about Ember JSON API resources giving you normal Rails controllers that you can work with, is you can do other things. So there's before action, which says to run a method before a given action is run, like a load data or save data or anything like that. And we say Doorkeeper authorize with a bang that indicates that something significant could happen. It'll error out if the user's not authorized. And so this says, if a user tries to hit any action on the author's controller, give them an error if they're not logged in. Same thing with ideas controller, quotes controller, and sources controller. I'm not going to do it on the user's controller right now because that's probably going to be the way that I let the users register in the future. I haven't set that up yet, but I probably will in the future. So we're going to leave that off, leave that protected. I suppose I probably would not want people to be able to write over other users in the future, but we'll come back to that. We will put that as a to-do. Allow users to register themselves, but don't let them overwrite other users' data. It's good to put in those to-dos so you don't forget them in the future. All right, so now with that protection, we've saved the changes and Rails will reload this code automatically. We're set to go. So now that we're logged out, if we go to authors here, we're going to get an error. And the error is 401 unauthorized. I think I just realized something else we're going to have to change as well. So when I log in, log in, but then when I go to the index route, we're actually still getting 401 unauthorized. And this is because we're not sending the authenticated information to the server yet. So we need to configure Ember data to send our authentication token to the server. So let's actually, let's commit this change in the API. Require auth to access resources. But then we need to find the change that we need to make in Ember data. So let's see here. Let's see if this is in my changes here, or if I need to look at it somewhere else. Adapters? Yeah, that's it. Okay, cool. I've got the info. All right, so in Ember data, the adapter is what we use to communicate to the server. We've had this set up for a while. It's a JSON API adapter. And so we're connecting to the server, and we've set up this class just to specify what host we're connecting to. But now we're going to need to add some other options. We're going to need to add an authorization header to let the server know who we are. And this follows the OAuth 2 standard as well. So let's see here. Let's see what we need to import. We're going to need a service. And then we're going to need to import this data adapter mixin from Ember Simple Off. So this is a mixin. What in the world does that do? I don't remember. So let's find out. I don't remember what this does. Usually I don't need to know. Here we go. To include authorization info in all Ember data requests if the session is authenticated, mix the data adapter mixin into the application adapter. Cool. This is interesting. This looks like actually I might have been doing extra work that I didn't need to do. It seems like with this mixin we may actually be set to go. So let's give it a try and see. So we're going to change the class here to use the older style that uses mixins, and so we need to configure options as what instead. Maybe that's all it was. Options equals. Interesting. Nope. Oh yeah. So let's let options equal an empty object there, and then we say if env.api host. Then we say options host. And API host. So either way, whether options is empty or whether we add the host to it, we put it in here. But this might be all. This is simpler than what I coded before. So let's check it out and see. Well, so that doesn't look like it's passing. So let's find out what's going on. The authorized method should be overridden in your application adapter. It should accept a single argument, the request object. Okay, so this is maybe saying that we do need to do it by hand as I was doing before. Authorizer. So the example, so I keep tabbing back and forth. The example in Ember Simple Auth just shows the authorizer. So let's try putting that in and see. Is that in options? Yeah, that's in options. So that might be all we need, even though that's not what I don't think that's what the error message said, but let's check it out and see. No authorizer factory for authorizer OAuth 2 can be found. All right, let's check this out. Oh, you know what? I think authorizers are deprecated. Although that's in the docs. Yeah. Authorizers. So authorizers is a thing that existed, but they're deprecated. And so instead, you should use a custom authorizer by putting an authorized method in there. So that's what had happened before. That's why this happened. Okay, so for options here, so here, this is why we had the session. We need the service. I don't think we need to specify the name of this session. Maybe we do. Let's find out. Let's try to keep it simpler like this and see. And then we have authorize. So here's an authorized method that's going to get the access token. I was in a let mode at the time, but I do prefer const. So let's get the access token out of here. So out of session.data.authenticated, and I think we're using get here just in case it errors out. But let's in order to keep things simple, let's just use normal JavaScript syntax. And then we're going to set the request header here, authorization bearer access token. And it doesn't like that that's not camel case, but that's okay. Let's just do ESLint, disable next line, camel case, because that's intentional. Oh. Usually we don't want camel case, but this is just the name of the property in there, so we need to work with it. Okay, so this might work. So we initialize our adapter that when it's asked to authorize, it'll get the access token out of Ember Simple Auth, and it'll send that in a header. So let's see if that works. It does. Okay, cool. So our data is loaded. And let's go to authors. So now our data loads successfully here, but if we log out, we're taken back to the home page, and if we go to the authors page, it's just going to error out, and it's going to say 401, unauthorized. So we've seen an example now of the server that's kicking us back, and it's not letting us load the data unless we're logged in. So this is great. So let's check this in. Send auth header to server. So we'll send the auth header to the server. Cool. So now we're logging in. Our app is forcing us to log in, and our backend is implementing the security of not returning data unless we're successfully logged in. You need to let the server side handle security because people can tweak and mess with what's in the front end. They can just change the JavaScript code all they want. And so our server is where the real protection lives. Anything about redirecting between screens on the front end is just for convenience of the user. And I'll just leave that sample username and password checked in for now. That's fine, and that'll be convenient for us. So the next thing, this is authentication. The next thing we can do is authorization. And what this is saying is, right now the data that I'm seeing is giving me all the ideas and all the authors on the server side. And I don't want to get them back. Let's say, for example, there's different sets of data belonging to different people. And let's say I don't want to see all of everybody's. I want my own personal data, and maybe we'd add some sharing feature later. So how can we have protected data in here? Well, we can do this by associating our data with different users and then just changing through JSON API resources what data is returned. So let's look into how to do that. I'm just going to check my stuff out here. So first of all, we need to change the database. So if we go to and I think all these changes are actually in the Rails side. I don't think anything changes in the Ember side, which is pretty cool. So if we look in schema RB, which is going to show the setup of our database, we can see that we have authors, ideas, sources. Was there one more thing? Quotes, but none of them are connected to a user. So we want to actually connect these to a user now. And specifically, we want the top level things to be connected to a user. Ideas, which kind of stand alone, and authors, which stand alone. So let's do a Rails generate migration, add user association to authors and ideas. We'll just do one migration to update both of those tables. That'll be nice and simple for us. What's with that error? Rails generate migration. What did I do wrong? Is this in the wrong folder again? Yeah, it's in the wrong folder again. Okay, cool. Let's copy this. Now, over in our Rails folder, we'll generate the migration. Just let this load up. Really got to get this virus scan software turned off. All right, our migration is in there. So now the change we want to make is just simply this. We want to add a reference to both of these tables, authors and ideas, referencing the user table. So we'll do Rails DB migrate to migrate the database. So now let's talk about the other models. What about sources? Do we need to restrict the sources? Well, sources belong to an author. So if my authors are limited, then the sources that belong to that author will be limited as well. And then for quotes, quotes belong to a source and to an idea. So if the source and the idea belong to the user, then I'll get to the quote as well. So that's why we don't need to have a user connection on the quote itself, and you'll see how we get to that data in just a minute. Okay, so in idea, so let's tell Rails about these relationships as well. Let me find this in here. Yeah, so we want to say an author belongs to a user, and we say that an idea belongs to a user as well. So this has set up this relationship, but now we need to populate this relationship and also query based on it. So we can do this in the resource. As you'll remember, these controllers are very lightweight, and the resource is where the bulk of the interesting things happen. So let's look at the author resource, for example. Now I've set up this application resource. This comes in the API up template with some helpful stuff to pass the current user information into JSON API resources. And this is all documented in the README for API up. So I recommend you go with it. So the way this works is instead of inheriting from the JSON API resource itself, we inherit from application resource, which itself inherits from there and adds some other things as well. So what does this give us access to? So first of all, when we're creating a record, we can say before create, and here's some code to run before we create a new record. We can say model user equals current user. So that code we set up in application resource makes the current user available to us, and so we just assign that to the user so that any records I create belong to me as the user. All right, what else here? So that's going to create that record. So let's do the same thing for idea. Application resource, and we're just going to copy over the before create. So now the user is assigned for both of those resources. So let's think about there's a little bit of security as well. It's like, so this user field is a field that exists, but we want to restrict it to make sure we're automatically setting it. So we don't want the user to be able to create it or update it. So we can secure that by calling these methods creatable fields and updatable fields. So this just takes the default fields that are available, and then we subtract out of that array the user field. So this ensures that this field can't be created or updated. And you can do security testing to make sure that you've got it set up correctly, but that should set it up correctly for us. So those are now set. Let me see if I update those. Yeah, we don't need to do updates to those to the quote and source resource because there's not a user field. Like just a source belongs to an author that belongs to a user. Cool, so these fields are here. Let's see what else we need to do. Oh yeah, so add user to it. So let's just do a commit here. Add user to idea and author. Now what? So now we need to say what records do we return. Now we need to just query to only get the records that are pertinent to us. So here's how we can do that. So let's start with the source resource because that's what's in front of me. I have application resource here. And then I say there's a method you can define on the class, the records method. And so this says what records are available for sources to be returned. And by default, it's just going to be all the sources in the database, but we can do something else. And in our case, we access this current user method, again, defined on application resource. Because it's a class method, we have to pass in the options here. So we just do that, and that gives us the current user. And so then now we say user.sources. And that actually reminds me, I need to define that relationship in here as well. We say user has many authors, has many ideas. So let's just add that into a previous commit. So in here we say, don't give me every source in the database, give me this user's sources. And that's what gives me some security there. Actually, no, I got to do something else to clarify that as well. So let's put this on authors and ideas. So a user has ideas. No. So a user has authors, and a user has ideas. So that's very obvious. But then now for a source and for a quote, what are we going to do? Like, those don't live directly on the user. Do we need to loop through and combine them all together? Well, Rails actually has a really nice way to handle this. Let me just make sure I got that syntax correct. What we can do, I love Rails, just can't get enough Rails. In Rails, we can also say, well, a user has many sources, but not directly. The sources don't have a user field on them. We have many sources through authors. And so what this tells Rails is, when I want sources, navigate into the authors relationship, and then navigate into the sources relationship, and then just give all of those to me on the user. And we can do it in the same way. We can say has many quotes through sources. So that's now 2 levels deep. So if I want all of my quotes, well, I have to go to the sources first. And if I want all my sources, I have to go to the authors first. And Active Record is going to intelligently do that for us and set up a good query so that it's not running n+1 queries or anything like that. It's just giving us, just giving us the data we want. So that should allow us to access sources and quotes. And so now on here, we can just say user sources. And on quotes, we can just say user quotes. And so although a lot of times we're going to be accessing these as relationships on, user quotes. Let's make sure I got all those right. Although a lot of the times, this is not right either. We're going to be accessing these through the relationships. This just restricts it to say, no matter what else is happening, don't give me access to any sources other than what's on right here. And we need to make that a bit fancier in the future if users were allowed to see each other's data or turn some data public or something like that. Okay, so that is now set up. So that should restrict what records that we have. And I think the database, did I migrate the database yet? Let's see if I did. It might actually error out because we have that field, that user field that has not been set. So we're probably going to want to update the seed data. So let's do that. We can actually Rails, we can quit out of Rails. Rather than manually setting up data, which can get really tedious, Rails loves to take away the tedium. And so we have this seeds data file that we set up to kind of populate the data. Previously, we were just setting up ideas and authors and sources and everything like that. But now we're going to need to set up users as well. So let's do that. We're going to set up one user. We're going to save the user, a user and another user. So 2 users. And then what we're going to do, instead of just creating ideas directly like this, in which case they'd error out because that relationship is required, we can say user.ideas.create. And so let's say here, okay, so we have, and we've got an author here. So we say user.authors.create, Sandy, and then the stuff from there goes just fine. We got user.authors.create, Martin Fowler. And so now let's just set up some data that should not be visible to me when I'm logged in as myself. So let's just go some stereotypes. I'm not a fan of the Twilight movies and novels, so let's just say Stephanie Meyer is not an author that I'm planning on reading at this point. Maybe someday in the future, once I grow in maturity. But for right now, it's not that appealing. So we'll say other user, authors, create, name, Stephanie Meyer. So that is now a record that should not be visible to me. And if that's not visible, then that'll prove to us that we're not seeing the other user's data. So I'm now setting up the database from scratch. And one of the reasons that this is a great idea in Rails is not only does it give you a nice clean start, it ensures that your seeds data file actually works correctly so that you or anyone else in the future can recreate your data. So that's nice. So let's go ahead through here. We could use Postman if we wanted to, or another tool to just kind of connect to that web service, but let's actually use the UI. So let's go to here. Here's our home screen of the application. And we're given the login screen. And now when we log in here and we go to the users tab, we see that we're getting Sandy Metz and Martin Fowler, but we're not getting Stephanie Meyer. And we can confirm that by looking into the data here to see that the data returned is Sandy Metz and Martin Fowler, but it's not Stephanie Meyer. Cool, so we've restricted our data. So let's just do this. Some children outside making some noise. Okay. Restrict let's say connect strict users to seeing only their own data. All right. So we've made some good progress. Our app is really working. We can't get in unless we log in, and then once we've logged in, we can only see our own data unless we configure things to work otherwise. I think that was everything we had, and this was actually relatively simple. It was mostly configuration to configure these resources. And notice that, yeah, for this authorization, our front end didn't need to know anything about it. We were just changing the data that was returned to the front end that it knows is available. So that was really nice. So this is our authentication and authorization. You know, there was some work. We had to write some stuff. But you know, it's a lot better than writing from scratch. We didn't have to decide where to save the data in the front end. It was saved in local storage for us. We didn't need to decide how to send the authorization header to the other side. So that's something a little bit lower level. But we had conventions to follow and patterns to follow. And this was great just for my learning as a front-end developer as well. By using Ember Simple Auth and the conventions in the Ember world, I got to see a great way to do things. So that when I was working with other frameworks that didn't provide guides like this, I had a pattern to follow. I could think through, okay, well, how would I store the token in a similar way? How would I do redirection in case you weren't logged in a similar way? So learning from these patterns in the Ember world can be really useful, even if you're not working in it every day. So that's our authentication and our authorization. Next time we're going to get back into some features and kind of adding some stuff. We still don't have a way from our quotes that show up in our sources here to go in and add ideas. These ideas are already there, but if we add a new quote, we don't have a way to add an idea to it. So we're going to add that in. We're going to make editability for some of the other screens to show up as well, and make our app a little bit richer and getting to the point where you can actually use it to take notes on your own. So that'll be next Friday. What is it, the 12th? So that'll be the 19th, 2 p.m. Eastern as usual. Hope to see everyone back there. And in the meantime, say hello to me on Ember Discord. I think somebody did say hello to me on Ember Discord during the stream, so let me pull that up and see. Kenneth Larson in News and Announcements says, Josh Justice is pretty cool. So thank you, Kenneth, from the Ember core team. I appreciate you saying hello. It's been really cool to see the newsletter kind of picking up this stream series. It's been fun to get into it and get a chance to be in Ember every day. And I highly recommend Ember, of course, and Rails on the back end. But yeah, so say hello to me in Ember Discord. Say hello to me on Twitter at Coding It Wrong. Follow on Twitch. You can follow and subscribe, and I don't know the difference between those two, but if you do both, you'll probably get notifications, which will be great. You can watch my YouTube channel as well for these recordings to be posted. Hope everyone has a great weekend. If you're watching live on the stream, Mr. Joseph, thank you for joining, and thank you for asking some great questions. Let me know if you find out that note about redirecting to the last route the user tried to get to. I'd love to know the answer to that. And we'll catch everyone next week. See ya. Bye.